Good evening, citizens, and welcome to the Shattersong LARP Diaries. Varushkan Pinewheel Edition. You are no longer citizens, you are cousins, and welcome in to my home, sit by the fire, and enjoy my hospitality. For today, I'm going to tell you about Varushka, my adventures within it thus far, and what it's been like to move nation. We're talking about Empire LARP today. I've moved across from Navarre after our sweet Prince Lindir Thornheart passed away in a tragic battle against, I believe it was the Cold Sun, actually. Giving his life for the empire that he so firmly believed in. Yada yada yada, bring in the next hero. But we're not here to talk about him, because he's dead, and if he's dead, he's clearly shit. And we're going to be talking about what it's like shifting nation, shifting into Varushka specifically, and playing one of the archetypes in there called a wagon raider. More on that later. But first of all, moving nation, I thought it was going to be really difficult and really scary, and I was about 30% right. It was all the fear of what might happen versus the reality I was presented with. I cannot remember who said this. I think it was either a psychologist or it's some quote from a film, but fear is something that dominates us. It changes how we act, how we react to things, and what we may or may not do, right? But a lot of the time, the things that we fear happening inside our head rarely actually turn out the way we think they're going to. I try and think if I'm afraid of something or a scenario I'm going into, the odds of that actually happening are like 1%. So I contrast it with what is the literal best possible response, and that might also be 1%. But the reality is it will land somewhere in the middle with good and bad bits. And that's what happened with Shifting Nation. I thought I was going to really struggle with meeting a new group of people, interacting with a whole new nation, a whole new culture, right? And especially as a long-time player, I'm surrendering some of that, some of the, I guess you could call it clout, as Lindir when he had that hat position as a champion of vigilance, to going back to being regular old citizen and building things from the ground up with no support network, no existing striding of friends to help me out. Very much showing up to solo LARP. And the bits that I really struggled with was the social element. I think it's LARP is a roleplay hobby, but it's based on your human skills, right? Your ability to interact and talk and change people's minds about X or Y or Z. And you join someone's cause or you strive against it, and it's the friction that it generates that creates such an interesting game. And with joining a whole new nation, I didn't really know anybody. I know people on an OC level, but in character, I don't. So they gave me some really nice little nods, and they're very welcoming. I think it's extremely important to stress that nobody at any point gave me any shade or pushed me out. They were extremely welcoming, more so than I've ever experienced to any other LARP, Empire or not, actually. The Varushkan brief has a very strong family orientation, and it's all about bringing people in, sharing food and wine with them, and making friends with them. On an OC level, I think this is a masterful technique used by PD to basically get people to get along. But in character, the reason being is that some monsters in Varushka can disguise themselves as people, but when they cross the threshold into your home and your towns and your vales, they are forced to obey by the rules of hospitality. So if you treat them well, they must treat you well in response. So be nice, and don't fuck around, and don't find out. And I think it's so cool. I had so many people saying, I'd walk up and say, hello, bluntly, I'd say a little bit under my breath, maybe like, "Hi, I'm you and Varushka cousin. Would you mind telling me what's going on here?" Because I'd see something, loud, or a group of people sat around having drinks, or maybe walking to a bar, or just someone standing by themselves, maybe waiting for a friend in a tent, or they themselves as a solo player, right? And after saying that maybe 4 times, I've got I was about to say entourage, but we won't go around as a group, but about 10 or 15 people, right? I could recognise by eye. Of course, I forgot their names, and we learned them over time, but we could see each other and get each other involved with X, Y, or Z over the course of the weekend. And that only took 45 minutes, an hour on my first night at E2. in 2024. And it was fantastic to be welcomed so openly. I did have to, pluck up the courage, maybe have a little drinky poo to go and sort of, you break into social circles, right? And some people are clearly mid-plot, they're deep in something important, it's like general elections, or they're trying to decide who goes in a skirmish, or maybe there's whatever fresh clusterfuck that PD have released in the Winds of Fortune they're trying to find a solution for. You don't want to walk in and say, hello, I'm brand new, please everyone pay attention to me, because whilst people are nice, you don't want to interrupt their game too much. It's about striking a balance, right? So I was very welcomed and started to kind of scout the ground for fellow wagon raiders. So for those of you who don't know, wagon raiders are fighting mercenaries, they're fighting troops in Varushka who go from contract to contract, and it could be guard duty in a Vale, and if they decide to live there long term, they can become Schlachter, which are kind of like professional warriors of Varushka. But quite often, they literally take an empty wagon, they will cross the border into barbarian-held lands, so like against the Druge, for example, and they'll just go and beat the shit out of them and nick a bunch of stuff, and I think that's really cool. Now, I'm doing them dirty here because there's a lot more to them. These warrior fraternities, you could say, the sort of culture and history that they build up as individual bands, and they merc for different parts of the Empire. I think they're the second most popular mercs in the Empire, wiki-wise, lore-wise, if you will, just behind the League. So it felt very on brief to go around and think, right, let's go and establish a fighting unit, and let's see who I can get on board. Let's get some contracts involved. Let's go and start up this company. It's quite literally Startup Simulator. And once again, pleasantly surprised by how well the brief in the Varushkan wiki has translated onto the field. Everything I've read felt relevant and useful, and people reacted in a way that I loosely expected them to react to certain knowledge. And the kind of customs that are laid out there were followed. And that was really interesting, because I felt like, even though I'm new to these people, I still felt Varushkan. I still felt like I had a strong identity, and that I fitted in with these people, if not socially, then culturally, right? So I managed to meet a few people, a handful of people I've known from previous characters, and they were really useful in pointing me in the right direction, but started to gather a few friends and former foes to this banner called the Pinewheels. The title of the episode, let's roll the credits already, but fundamentally what I'm trying to do with this, I say actually, what I was trying to do with that character, more on that twist later, was start up this company, start up these mercs, get people on board, with the broad idea being that we like pine trees, we have this little, out in Ostium we've got this little sort of tavern that we run, and there's woods around it so we can like hew lumber and stuff like that. We've got mines we can dig at, or if people in the group want to run businesses, you've got the tavern as like a really cool IC space to pretend that's come from, right? And then every summer, we pick up a wagon, we go and nick stuff, and we come back. And we made a design document for this. So what's our look going to be? What's our logo? What's our intention as a group? It's very, I won't say it's vague actually, it got quite detailed, but it's broad. It's not limiting in what we do. And it's things like, we want to fight in the shield wall. We want to be able to sell ourselves as mercenaries to other generals in the Empire. We care about Ossium and the Druge. We don't care so much about the Jotun. What are our political views? It doesn't matter. They vary from trooper to trooper, right? And what do we want to do in Anvil? We want to run a bit of a casino, that kind of thing. We just made a little wish list, a Christmas wish list of what we wanted to do inside LARP. And it's the first time I've done that, because all the other times I've played it as in Navarre, right? Exclusively ever since I've been playing Empire for like 8 years now. I knew what I wanted to do with a character, but I never had a group level objective, and that's what's changed this time. And it felt really cool to build something that's bigger than one person and see other people wholeheartedly get on board as well. I'm definitely going to do some interview episodes with other members of the group. Some of them are brand new LARPers as well, and just to give you their perspectives on what it's been like but we've had a lot of fun, and it's gone from strength to strength. That said, though, battling a new kit and switching across. So a lot of the Navarre kits, like the browns and the like, are transmissible over to Varushka. Varushka gets, I think, an unfair sort of outsider's view of kind of being a little bit winter marky with funny hats. They actually have a lot of colour in their costumes as well, so you can have really lovely blues, yellows, greens, like lovely pastel colours on your jackets and nice trims and decoration. But you can also start off with some really simple pieces of kit as well. So I went to the ever useful charity shops and got myself some old shirts, work shirts and the like. Cut off the collars, got a sewing machine with like a stitching setting for cute little zigzags, and put those on the cuffs and the neckline in a nice bright red thread. Whacked on some brown hero trousers, put some puttees on, so those little foot wraps and arm wraps, and acquired a nice little hat, and you're good to go. And you can get sort of the Cossack-y coats where they maybe they're not Cossack. They're sort of like sweeping large coats, but they seal sideways rather than sort of straight down the middle, like straight down your belly or your chest. It goes from like your top right shoulder to your bottom left of your hip. That kind of fastening. But otherwise, picking up heavy armor and scary iron helms, like sort of all-enclosed facial helmets with the plumes on top or the spikes. Those are really cool. Lots of lamellar armor in the nation as well, which looks fucking fantastic. But again, people get chain on with decorated leather. There's a set of virtuous animals that the Varushkans have. So there's lots of like geese and squirrels and boars and stuff all over the shop. And it gives you some really cool leeway. Well, maybe leeway isn't the right word. Inspiration to make some fantastic pieces of kit, and lots of them are on display in Varushka. And I've got to say, the costume quality in Varushka is outstanding. The Schlachter are in full suits of armor, and they look scary. The wardens, which are analogous to witches, you could say, they look very like earthbound and wild in a way. The armor's patchy but still functional, and there's chain in there. It's really cool. And the Volovs, which are sort of the mage, broadly a mage archetype, they've got lovely hats, big sweeping coats, and they've got their staves. Oh, fantastic. Like visually, Varushka marching to war looks perfect. I think it's, you see Wintermark marching in their huge columns, or the orcs doing their drums. It's very cool. But watching a Varushkan force deploy, you've got some of the heaviest, nastiest fighters on the pitch, and some of the wealthiest as well. Varushka's got a lot of, in terms out of character terms, right? It's got a lot of buffs to its mines and its forests as well. So they're very materially wealthy, which means they can make lots of magic items. And the average Varushkan warrior will have 3 or 4 magic items on them. And they won't just be like an apprentice blade. There'll be some really stonky stuff in there. So very, very tough and very, very fun to fight with. That said, I didn't actually fight with them at E2. The first time, I'd met a few people, made some social connections, but I didn't feel like I had a unit to take to the field yet. I kind of didn't want to just sort of blob around by myself. And don't get me wrong, I was very much welcomed to do so. At no point did I feel like I couldn't take part. It's that I chose not to take part. So I did double monstering for the first time. And that is where you volunteer to monster on both days. So I got to put on all my cool orc kit, get my big axe out, get my scary mask on and some chainmail, and just swing around a big axe for a few days. And it was so much fun, because I got to go against my old social group at the Black Scar Bunch in Navarre. Got to go toe-to-toe with them as a monster, and then the next day fight alongside them as well. So when switching nations, I think the idea that you leave your friends behind, you don't have to. On the field, you're either fighting against them, which is always fun, or you can monster and fight with them and just get lucky. It's really cool. And I spent a lot of time sort of walking back and forth to Navarre to see them and introducing a new character and starting to get some business stuff going and just getting some traction. And I had a full 10 out of 10 positive fun event. I'll leave it there for the moment, because I think I I don't want to ruin some of the E3 and E4 stuff, which is where we've gone from literally 1 or 2 members up to 15, maybe at a push 20 now. And the big question mark is how we get organised before E1. But we've got to the point now where a banner, the actual mechanical mercenary banner, has been paid for, and I think it's been made. So at E1, boom, this plot document we made at E2 last year has taken 9 months to get ready. Oh, probably longer than 9 months. Maybe 10, maybe 11, crikey. But either way, it's come to fruition in 3 in-game events, which is about 9 months. And I am really, really excited to see that come to fruition and see what happens. Of course, there's been some deaths on the way, and we'll cover those in more detail. But to round off today's episode, Varushka is fucking great. The brief is great. The archetypes are really fun. And if any of you out there are considering moving nations in general, you're not quite sure if you want to stay where you are currently, I would wholeheartedly recommend just switching. And it maybe even half an event, right? Maybe not turning up to, let's say, E1 this year, right? You don't just turn up with a new character and hope for the best. I think, maybe try and, if you want to go out in combat, you could just basically keep taking more and more unfair fights until you're eventually and inevitably slain. Or if you're not a combat type, just retire. Retire on Friday or Saturday evening and then spend just a half day trying out that new nation. Because when you haven't got to commit a whole weekend to it and there's no force on it being a success, it becomes a much more pleasurable exercise. Because, okay, if I don't like this, great, I'll just sack in my kit, I've not lost a whole event, and I can, use this and go and have a look at another nation, potentially in the same event, right? Just execute that character in a particularly aggressive Portaloo murder, and then boom, you're in Wintermark, or boom, you're in the Brass Coast. Or boom, you just put some generic kit on and you just enjoy Anvil for what it is. And fundamentally, do the thing that LARP is for, which is have fun. So yeah, if you are... I was about to do an advert there. I was about to say, if you're keen to murk and beat the crap out of stuff, sure, you can come and find me and we'll see what there is. We're going to do some advertising in character, and we like to keep things as icy as possible, but very much look forward to either fighting against you, fighting with you, or fighting for you at E1 this year. But until then, goodbye.